Hello, hello. Hold on one second. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Hello,
Welcome.
Mr. Bainbridge. Welcome to Joker LMHC Presents with my esteemed co-host, Emmeline. Emmeline, you can
Hi.
introduce yourself, give them the rundown, tell me alphabet soup.
Okay. I'm Emmeline Valadares. I am a board certified behavior analysis with a New York State license in behavioral analysis. And I have a master's degree in special ed and regular ed and a certificate in ABA.
All right, so for the rest of the show, I'm just not going to say anything because
No, not at all, because you're the LMHC.
uh,
So when it comes
so
to this, you're more equipped.
eh, it's all relative. It's kind of what you'll see with a lot of these diagnoses that we're going to eventually get into over the course of the year. Hello, Mr. Nails. When we get into over the course of the year, it's definitely going to be more along the lines of how it pertains to the population you're working with. I just happen to work with a couple of different populations than him, but we do work with overlapping ones. Um, yes, I am Joker, Sir Joker, Achilles. I have my license in mental health counseling, and what we do is I provide therapy, I provide support services. I also play a BIS on the weekends and for TV. Hello, Mr. Hall. So today we're going to get into the shits. We're going to talk about something that I think parallel knew stuff about, but I don't think I've ever really sat down and actually really looked into seasonal affective disorder. What about you, Miss M?
So sad, I never heard of before, in the sense of until I kind of got into working with more mental health cases. I did know about seasonal depression. I did have a family member who had it. And there were times where this person had to be like, I had to go and be hospitalized and get help and stuff like that. However, I never saw the start of it. So
Mm,
I would never be able to tell you, oh yeah, this person looks depressed, or oh, something's not right. Like that was something that I never saw. It was just a phone call letting me know, like, hey, this is what's going on.
right.
So now where we are, I still don't have anyone technically with seasonal affective disorder. But I do know that there's definitely a cycle with some of the people that we support, that when the fall and the winter months come, their
Mm.
behaviors definitely heighten, or depression comes in. So I do work with people who have depression.
Well, yeah, one of the things that, and we'll get into this a little bit later, one of the through lines with most diagnoses is some type of anxiety and or depression.
Hmm.
It's very prevalent. So I think that's why a lot of times you, so when we're working with somebody, me and Emma work with somebody, we typically tend to work on their primary diagnosis, they call it. And we'll get into diagnoses in a couple of minutes. But a primary diagnosis is the first diagnosis you're given. If your first diagnosis is a mental health diagnosis, then that's what you typically have. Like they'll put you on the mental health side. If your first diagnosis is like autism or some developmental disability, they'll put you on the people with developmental disability side. So a lot of times people are getting diagnosed, and it's diagnosed based on money rather than based on actual need of service.
Or it's based on the fact that they want better supports that they would get from not OMH, I'm sorry, OPWDD for New York
Mm-hmm.
State, as opposed to OMH. Like
Right.
I have families that, they have this diagnosis, and you're like, why are you here? And they say, because we get more support this way. They have people who will be able to take them out into the community. They have a behavior specialist that's going to work with them. OMH is different.
So yes, what typically we will see is people will get their services. It's not that it's not based on need, but I don't know if it's always based on the most prevalent need, the most important need. But so let's look at the monster we're talking about: seasonal affective depression, seasonal affective disorder, seasonal depression. Those are kind of just like names people go by. It's actually part of major depressive disorder with a seasonal pattern. So when you're looking at different seasons, and let's be real, most of the time it's kind of like the same holiday that affects everybody, that triggers everybody. It's kind of like right after Halloween to probably March, April. I would say that's the prevalent, with the winter months being the most impactful, and kind of make people feel it the most. So major depression, minor depression, depressive disorder. Depression typically ebbs and flows, right? So it's hard to say how much depression. So that's why seasonal depression, there's some people that legitimately do get worse during the winter. And maybe because they're out more and doing more things and around more people during the summer, it could get better. During the summer, spring, it could get better. However, I find, and then you can chime in 1 second, when we talk about depression, I think it kind of goes a little bit more on a person's personality and the things that are kind of going on in their life.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when we go into like the symptoms, like there's certain symptoms that I was looking at and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, but I feel like some of the things is like typical people also go through some of these motions, and we have a couple of people that we work with the season with depression. And like I have one client in particular, like I was going through this and I thought, oh, she clocks, she checks a lot of boxes, but then, in the summer, she'll still have some presenting behaviors that is definitely more increased in the winter months.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I see why they didn't get this diagnosed.
Right. 100%. And I think it's something that's easy to get. I think it's easy to get lost in the mix when we're talking about depression versus major depressive disorder versus affective disorder. And a lot of these things, again, I'm telling you what the diagnoses are, how it's labeled. I understand that everybody experiences it different, and that's what any diagnosis. So real quick, to kind of the signs that you have or might be dealing with SAD or major depressive disorder. I understand that it's not just about seasons. I agree with you, John. I'm telling you what is the definition
for this particular
for what the definition is. I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. I'm telling you what the working clinical diagnosis is. So feeling sad or having a depressed mood, loss of interest or pleasure in activities, changes in appetite, eating less, changes in sleep, loss of energy. Sounds like me when I became a parent. Increase in purposeless physical activity, feeling worthy or guilty, difficulty thinking, concentrating on making decisions, thoughts of death or suicide. There's a lot of comorbidity between suicidality, suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, and depression in general. And I think one that's kind of missing is probably motivation. Like I just don't see motivation from people that are, dealing with major depression. And if the winter is their bad season, if the summer's your bad season, if the spring's your bad season, if all year's your bad season, then there are going to be specific things that trigger you. Your thoughts in.
um, I definitely agree with these symptoms and diagnosis. Not that I'm, a psychiatrist or anything. But with what you're mentioning, with the lack of motivation, like for typical people,
Mm,
if they're living alone or, families don't believe in depression or, I think it's even harder for them to get motivation where in our agencies, the people that we support have people around them that are continuously trying to motivate them. And like when one of the people that I support starts to go into that, like starts to dip into that depression,
mm,
it really is like a pulling her out and like explaining like all the wonderful things like she's done and why she matters in this world, and what is it that we're looking forward to, or what is it that we're going to do. She likes to help people, so for her it's trying to figure out like what's the next, like what's the word I'm looking for, like she does donation boxes, so it's
oh, charity.
yes, so she's very big, so that's something that we utilize with her, because when she starts to go into her depression, the things that for this particular person with her symptoms and diagnosis is that, like, there's no desire to get up and even go to the bathroom. We're just urinating on ourselves. And there were times when I first started working with her where she would sit in her urine for hours, and then staff would have to try and like be like, you gotta get out of bed, like you're getting rashes and those type of things. um
Mm-hmm.
when it's hard. It really, I feel bad for a typical person because they lack that support sometimes that at least the
Mm-hmm.
people that we support are getting.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the other diagnosing criteria, and I'm talking about this because we want you to understand how we get to a diagnosis. So some of the things that they kind of describe SAD as a biochemical imbalance in the brain prompted by shorter daylight hours and less sunlight in the winter. I've heard a lot about this. This is what is typically associated with, not always typically. As seasons change, people experience a shift in their biological internal clock or circadian rhythm that can cause them to be out of step with their daily schedule. I think when I look at depression in general, that's what it is. And I think a lot of times people don't have a daily schedule. Like a lot of times people just kind of follow what they have to do. But when you talk about, um, I figured, John, I gathered that you're diagnosed.
with
Um,
with with sad or with depression?
Probably seasonal
Okay.
affective disorder, because that's what he's kind of been talking about. I haven't been putting all the things up.
Hmm.
And it also said SAD is more common for people living further from the equator with fewer daylight hours in the winter. Again, these are all things that go kind of hand in hand with what I've learned, what I've heard. I haven't. Oh, he said both. He has diagnosed with both. I haven't dealt with a lot of people where they've only had major depressive disorder, seasonal pattern. I have had a lot of people that are just depressed because I don't, and this is not, it depends on the doctor one, but I think a lot of people just now is kind of just clumped into one. Because I do feel like people that are just depressed, typically, not everybody, typically, they usually have patterns to when their depression ebbs and when it flows and when it, peaks and when it valleys.
Hmm.
Um, so
Usually,
most,
like I'm sorry.
no, no.
Sometimes it's anniversary dates,
Mm-hmm.
people passing away, people
Mm-hmm.
who are no longer in your life, and you know what day that is. The fact that you can't do certain things anymore is definitely some of those key things that will trigger symptoms.
Right. So when it comes to any kind of going to a doctor, going to a psychiatrist, psychologist, a therapist, going to a pediatrician. We have to diagnose. In America, we primarily use what's called the DSM, which is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They're on version 5. They're on version 5 with the TR, which is the revision. They get a group of people together every several years, and they come up with a list of all of it's kind of like the Bible of diagnosing. This is what this looks like. These are the diagnoses. These are what it's defined by. So the DSM uses codes. The codes in the DSM are called ICD codes, ICD-10 codes, which are international classifications of diagnosis codes. What was happening is people going to the doctor, and we had DSM codes, but didn't have international codes. So you went to like Bangladesh, you went to China, you went wherever. They didn't have a universal code that anybody could look at anywhere in the world and say, oh, okay, M has sociopathology. M's not really a sociopath. But
Just play one on TV.
That's the best place to play it. I get it, Dexter. So when we have the codes, they provide a comprehensive list of diagnostic criteria for each recognized mental illness disorder. And a lot of things become kind of not necessarily real diagnoses, but they become kind of like anecdotal diagnosis. They become kind of, slang almost of, like SAD isn't necessarily the diagnosis. If somebody's telling you that, what they're writing in a diagnostic is different. The diagnostic tool is different. One goal of the revision was to better align the diagnostic criteria and coding. So the DSM uses F codes. F codes are broken up into organic, mental, and behavior disorders, codes for schizophrenia, codes for mood disorders, codes for neurotic anxiety, etc. There's about 15 categories of codes. Correct. But that's why.
And diagnose themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, but you could.
It's the same thing with Google.
Yeah, WebMD. I can tell you that I'm dying of cancer.
Oh, are you? I'm sad. That's sad. I like it. Yes, anybody could probably read, but this is where expertise comes in. So like for New York, they're giving LMHCs diagnosing official diagnosing criteria in June. You could apply for official diagnosing criteria because what happens is, as I've said before, it's not just reading a book and looking at, Jimmy coming with the first year med school syndrome. Okay, Jimmy, leave me alone. I'm in my second year of med school, fucker. But when it comes to diagnosing, it's supposed to be it's more like an art than just straightforward. There's little nuanced things that you have to be able to recognize in people. Me and him work around people with autism every day, all day. What we see and what we notice and what we pick on, I probably knew Armani and Patty did too because she worked at a residence. We picked up on it probably 2 years before he was diagnosed because you see the things. You see the little, this is what's going on. Yeah, anybody can misdiagnose, but that's why you should always get a second opinion on a diagnosis. And you should also have somebody explain to you why. Nobody should be talking to you for 5 minutes and giving you a diagnosis. I don't think. There are so many symptoms, but the difference between the symptoms are nuanced. And you really have to deal with people who have the different types of things to know the difference. Like if you know somebody who's depressed versus somebody's anxious, who's very anxious. Anxiety and depression are pretty close. They're the same they're in the same field. They're in the same family, but they're not the same thing. But that's just like trying to differentiate between a panic attack and an anxiety attack. So a lot of these things are nuanced. And John, you're correct. But what happens is people get letters after their names and they go, oh, no, this is your diagnosis. I've been doing this for forever out there. I know. But there are times when I've made diagnosis and I've been like, and I don't, this is why you don't tell people they have this. You don't have this.
No, instead we go, I think I have this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then they ask you the questions to correlate, see if possibly you have those characteristics. But again, if you're looking at the DSM-5 and you're trying to diagnose yourself, then I would say that you should find someone who specializes in those things and then ask them, because they're going to know much better.
Right. No, John.
No, we know John, you've been diagnosed.
John, I'm not okay. John, we're not having a specific debate with you. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm telling you, and we both did our research. I'm telling you what the research is telling us. It's informing you. I'm not saying that your experience. I'm not saying that you're wrong. Again, there is a difference between SAD and depression, but you see very little SAD diagnoses, and you see more depression diagnoses. Was my point. And now what me and Em are talking about is how they come to the diagnosis. So, Em, you were looking at different seasonal disorders too, right? You dug into a rabbit hole.
Again, with the DSM-5, it was really just the seasonal pattern that comes with it. So it's really it was really just the characteristics and the symptoms and the diagnosis, and how long it was correlated, how long it was lasting. But I think the main one is SAD. You have the seasonal depression, and then you had SAD. Like the other depressions that I saw weren't necessarily seasonal. Because again, looking at the DSM, that's pretty much what happened. Like it there's a portion in it that says like seasonal pattern. So there's a lot of different disorders that could also be seasonal, like bipolar. That was something that I learned. I was like, oh, bipolar could have a seasonal pattern to it, which learning that, I'm like, oh, that explains a lot for one of the ladies that I'm working with. But I was I was doing more of like a deep dive into different, what's it called? Different journal articles that had seasonal depression, or it said seasonal depression, but again, depending on the year, SAD just came out on the DSM-5, right? As its own thing. That's why I think, because previous to that it was just part of like seasonal depression. So some journal articles will say seasonal depression, and then more recent articles will say SAD. And I was looking at those type of articles that was testing to see the theory of whether just blue light or medication with blue light was more effective. And they said that blue light helps in the beginning, but of course a balance of blue light therapy and medication seen better results. Not like a significant amount of better results, but that it was more helpful for them.
Right. So I see John has the experience with this seasonal affective disorder. Have you worked with anyone who you knew this was one of the major things that they were struggling with? Not depression, but SAD specifically.
Me?
Yes, you, Em.
Oh, I thought you were talking to that guy.
No, I was talking to you.
With
John
SAD,
was pointing out that he has the diagnoses, and he was clarifying the terms for us.
No, I have one person that um they were getting a diagnosis seasonal depression, but
Mm-hmm.
again, the family thought because he didn't want to go and do certain things that, oh, he must have this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but then when I observed him, he was perfectly fine. Like it wasn't like he was not engaging in completing like his we call them ADL, so the assisted daily living skills. So brushing his
Mm-hmm.
teeth, getting dressed. He was utilizing the bathroom. He was taking showers. He didn't want to go to
Mm-hmm.
day program and he didn't want to go to doctor's appointments. And then other times he did, um, which we didn't see when it was the spring and the summer. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
out and about.
Okay.
So now it's just, and again, he's someone that is diagnosed with autism, and there
Mm.
was a change in his routine. So now we have to go back to that routine or set up
Yeah.
a new routine.
Nice.
Yes.
Um, so according to National Institute of Mental Health, they have actually ways of differentiating some additional symptoms for winter pattern sad and summer pattern sad. Winter pattern sad is oversleeping, overeating, particularly with a craving for carbohydrates, leading to weight gain, and social withdrawing, feeling like hibernating. That sounds like me.
No, that's a tough one, I think, for
Yes.
people being diagnosed,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people, because it's colder, your body naturally is going to crave carbohydrates because you want something that that's going to fill you. Plus, some carbohydrates are better with fat and stuff. So,
All
and then
carbohydrates are just better.
they are.
Yeah.
They are. But then the sleeping, we lose an hour
Mm-hmm.
for the winter months as well. So
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes people could also be misdiagnosed because they don't think that they have it because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, oh, it's just the winter and then I'm fine.
Mm-hmm. So they do talk about the idea of like the winter blues and season blues, and I think this part of the year in general is triggering for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Holidays, supposed to be getting together, people being forced to be together with their families who they might like or might not like.
Hmm.
I also think that the being inside more, like I said, a lot of the things. So when they talk about the additional symptoms for the winter pattern SAB, it's like, but that could be somebody who's just depressed. That could be somebody who's anxious. That could be
Hmm.
somebody who the social withdrawal and feeling like hibernating. If I have a social phobia, I don't want to go outside. I don't want to go outside and talk to people. I don't want to be outside my house. But there are people who are just more comfortable in their house in certain settings as opposed to other settings. Um, but I do want to juxtapose that with summer pattern SAD, which symptoms can include trouble sleeping, poor appetite leading to weight loss, restlessness and agitation, anxiety, and violent or aggressive behavior. So now I do wonder why the summer sad leads to violent or aggressive behavior and restlessness, where winter sad
It's
makes you
too hot
withdraw.
because it's too hot.
So you become violent or aggressive. That's interesting.
It's too hot. They-
But there's also, the whole, so when you talk to somebody who is neurodivergent, ADHD, and they have trouble like regulating their internal body temperature, what do you do with that? Is that sad? Is that depression, or is that just having trouble?
I think I Yeah, they're angry. Yeah. But again, like those that are taking psychotropic medications,
Hmm.
we warn like our DSPs, like, hey, we're getting into the hotter months. You have to make sure that, you know, the ladies are drinking plenty of fluids because they'll dehydrate quicker, and because of the psychotropic medications, their skin is more sensitive. And some of the people that we support that are fair skinned are are even more, you know, susceptible to sunburn because of their fair skin. And then, you know, but we tell them, you know, no matter what race they are, or like, put sunblock on them. And staff will be like, why? This person doesn't need it. They have plenty of melatonin, and you still gotta put the sunblock on them, to protect them. But I think hotness, I think being hot, the regulating your body temperature, I think those that are in the winter months who are eating more carbs, let's say, and they're not exercising, and then they have to go into the summer months where you have to show more skin, definitely can make you irritable and depressed and like self insecure and have anxieties too. So I can see where, you know, some people could take the summer months as more difficult. You know, you have less in the winter, you have more layers.
Right. No, and it's true.
But I haven't seen that. I haven't seen seasonal depression for the summer months. With anyone.
Again, I don't know. I think SAD is probably underdiagnosed. I would say it's underdiagnosed, if anything, because I think a lot of times those depressive symptoms people are lumping in with depression, right? So John was saying that in terms of like the regulation, that if it's 10 degrees change in temperature, it can affect them up, mess them up for a couple of days.
Aww.
Jimmy, you're always angry. Jimmy said he gets angry when he's hot, but Jimmy's just always angry. So, interestingly enough, and you'll eat this up, it's more common in people with depression or bipolar disorder, especially bipolar 2, which involves repeated depressive episodes and hypomanic episodes, less severe than the typical manic episodes of bipolar 1. Additionally, people with SAD tend to have other mental disorders such as ADHD, eating disorder, anxiety disorder, panic disorder. But again, when you look at these things, this is, you know, and to John's point, this is how that overlap and that comorbidity, like you could look at somebody who has SAD and maybe OCD, and you could be like, oh, maybe they're bipolar, because a lot of people can't tell a difference between manic and just really hyperactive. A lot of people can't tell a difference between sad and, you know, just going like sad, like I'm sad, not SAD, and depression. So
I think it's definitely sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I think that it's definitely, as you said, underrated, underdiagnosed. Because just as soon as you said bipolar 1 and 2, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because it's a way easier diagnosis to fit a lot of things under, as opposed to just going, oh, you know, you have this. But also, I mean, some of those diagnoses, you're using the same treatments though. So,
I mean, and a lot of these diagnoses that you're talking about all overlap. 10 years ago, they didn't really have adult ADHD, adult ADD. They had bipolar. And typically teens and adolescents that were diagnosed with ADHD when they were younger were diagnosed with bipolar when they got older. If you look at the overlap, you know.
Yep. As soon as they turned, I think with one of the ladies I worked with, I think as soon as she turned like 19 or 20, she went from that diagnosis to a bipolar diagnosis.
Well, a lot of the mental illness diagnoses do have spectrums now. You know, they because they happen in ranges. Schizophrenia, that has a spectrum. ADHD, ADD, autism, they all have spectrums because there is so much overlap and so many things can happen at the same time.
Hmm.
If you look at somebody who has anxiety, you give somebody enough anxiety, they start hallucinating. They start hallucinating, start having delusions of grandeur. Then, well, they had anxiety. Do they have schizophrenia now? Or, yes, John, everything is a spectrum, but the disorder is the term. I understand that a lot of people don't like the word disorder. A lot of people don't like diagnosing, but you can't do your job without a guideline to work by in terms of getting it paid for, getting it worked on, getting it addressed. Uh, a disorder, I
Getting
think,
getting getting prescriptions.
getting prescriptions. Like there has to be something that regulates it, that keeps people in a direction. Because what a lot of people are like, oh, I hate this, I hate diagnosing. Well, if I didn't have diagnosis, it would just be me throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to get it to stick. And I think that would
But
be really hard. So yeah, I do understand that you believe that everything's a spectrum, but there are things that are disorders, and I think that's for a reason. And I think what we have to work on is not necessarily changing what it's called, but changing the stigmas around how people are addressed and treated.
agreed.
Um,
Couldn't have said it better myself.
well, I was looking at the transcript of our last conversation. I read that from you. It's estimated that millions of Americans experience that, although many may not know they have this common disorder. And it begins in young adulthood, and it also can be prevalent in families, which is interesting because a lot of bipolar, borderline, ADHD, autism, it's not confirmed, but, I've seen too often where 4 siblings will have autism. The
Hmm.
parents will have autism. It's just like, oh, okay. You can't tell me it doesn't run in the family. There's not some kind of familiar pattern to it. A lot of these things all run in family groups, and you can see we work with individuals in group homes, and a lot of times, how many times you said, "Oh, I see where the kid gets it from."
I love. I believe I love the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yes.
is always the one that I like to do, and then there is nurture versus nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one that I'll look at and just say.
Mm-hmm. And, and, and I feel like a big piece is that if you have somebody who's not diagnosed or not seeking mental health treatment, then if they're raising a kid who has the same thing, they're not treating it because they didn't treat it.
Hmm.
So you now change and I don't like this word, but you now change the scope of what normal for that person is, like normative to that person. So normal, because not everybody's normal, but everybody can have what's normalized to them. So Emmeline's normal. Emmeline. Is it Emmeline?
I'm a lean,
Oh, I didn't know
not
that.
lean, not like lean, like Emmeline.
I'm gonna say Emmeline.
That's
I know
fine.
you don't care.
I
Uh,
don't.
so
That's why it
sorry.
says M.
I like to get names right. You know that. So when you have what's like normative for you, it's gonna be normative to me. Even though if you lined our diagnoses up or whatever, you probably like, huh, are they related?
I think the
But it
other thing
presents
is,
different.
yeah, but I think also when working with the people we support who are more capable,
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about them with these things, they like to throw out, well, you're normal, and I'm like, I'm like, whoa, 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 normal is not normal anymore. I go,
Okay.
abnormal is actually normal. Being different than everyone else is the new norm.
Yes.
Um, so with the diagnoses and things like that, it's definitely interesting to see
Mm-hmm.
the changes in the families. I had a parent who told me that they were just late diagnosed with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
and someone with ADHD doesn't really have that organizational skills, let alone likes to go in a routine. And meanwhile, her daughter has autism and she needs that
Mm-hmm.
schedule. So where the mom wants to just fly by the with
Mm-hmm.
the wind, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
her daughter needs a schedule,
Structure.
and
Yeah.
and it's training. Now what we're seeing as clinicians is when you're treating the child or the young adult, you
Mm-hmm.
also have to do parent training so that the parent understands how you have to work with them.
Mm-hmm. So that leads me to what the whole idea of everything's a spectrum, not a disorder, which Mr. Bainbridge so eloquently labeled. I do think that one of the biggest pieces why we do need some type of diagnosis and some type of label for it is because we need to be able to educate. And you've been there when we've been talking to people that are working with guys on the spectrum, working with guys with bipolar, and they don't even know what it is. They don't know what it looks like. They don't.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. What do you
Or
know about bipolar? I don't know anything about it.
or they
What is it?
present normal.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then, for someone who's diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, then their emotions and their feelings heighten, where an incident that occurs should be at like a 3 and they're at
Yep.
like a 25. And now you have to explain to staff that this is this is how they are. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna be very emotional, and you have to allow them to be that emotional. When you tell them it's not that big of a deal, you make it more of a deal to them. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to acknowledge them so you can help bring back those emotions, lower on that intensity.
Yeah. One of So it was saying that sad is more common in people who have relatives with other mental illnesses, such as depression or schizophrenia. So it runs in the family. But if somebody has a relative who has some of these diagnoses, because the way I learned it 345 years ago when I was in school was that mental illness is an imbalance in brain chemical. A lot of people don't believe that anymore. I do, because what medication is supposed to do is bring back some sort of balance, right? That's why medication isn't necessarily perfect or right for everybody, but my medication helps people, right? So when we talk about, kind of causes and what causes sad, um, they're looking and they're easy to it's easier for them to study winter pattern sad because I think there's just more research done on it. I know. I think even what John was saying, being more north than us, being in Canada where it's colder typically and less sunny typically, you're
Hmm.
probably going to have more cases of winter pattern sad. I am not saying there's not cases of summer pattern sad, but I'm saying there's probably going to be more cases of winter pattern sad. And if you go up Alaska, you go up to the poles. Go ahead.
I wonder how it's like in Seattle. Because Seattle was at one point, I don't know if they still do, but I know at one point they had the highest level of suicide rate. So I wonder how, if they have a high rate of SAD if it's
Mm,
diagnosed.
okay. I don't know. That's a good
Because
question.
I know Alaska has a high rate of SAD because, half of their months are in complete darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the articles that I was reading, the treatments were done in Canada and in Alaska because
Mm-hmm.
that's where it was more predominant.
Mm-hmm.
But they did it in, what I liked about these articles was that they had a good sample size. They did
Mm-hmm.
it in like 4 or 5 different um, facilities around the the country, I believe it was. So I thought that was interesting.
But that is real interesting because Jesus, this is crazy.
Oh my God,
This is
that's where
nuts.
you live?
Yeah, Mr. Bainbridge is a Canadian, a fine fellow from the
Oh
world of
man,
Canada. And
jeez.
also, I do want to point out that sad. I'm gonna go into a couple of boring things in 1 second, but when you talk about outside of the United States, where mental health is very accepted here and explored, you go outside of the United States, they don't even believe in like a lot of the mental health things that we do. That's
Mm.
why you probably have under reporting first, and then underdiagnosing, because a lot of I'll use the groups that West Indian, people that are from like Italy, people that are from other countries. They don't necessarily believe in the stuff that we believe. Their ideals are different. Their belief, their understanding of stuff is different. The way they study and look at it is different. I've had people that from other countries. Oh, your son might be autistic. No, he just doesn't listen. Or he's
My
autistic.
son likes to jump on the trampoline.
Yeah, 100 times for 4 hours a day. You're right.
Yeah.
And again, and I think finding out where the line of division is, that's hard. The line of demarcation, because I have family members that are autistic, and looking at them, and my brother, he's autistic, but Armani, if you sat down and talked to him, you might not know. After a while, you'd be like, oh, his battery doesn't turn down ever. It hasn't turned down in 9 years, so this could be something going on.
But he also has to be comfortable first.
Yeah.
Like when I first met him, we didn't have any interactions, and the second to last interaction where he got comfortable with me,
Yep.
then he didn't stop, and I loved it.
And I think, and that's one of the hardest parts about diagnosing, because you want to go off instinct, but you can't rush to a decision. You can meet with somebody 5-6 times before you even come up with an idea of a diagnosis. And especially with ones that aren't, nobody wants to hear they're borderline because stigma. Nobody wants to hear that they're autistic because stigma. Nobody wants to hear that they're schizophrenic or bipolar because stigma. Now, are there some people, and you've worked with people, I worked with people that are, the clinical definition is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. There's nothing that anybody's going to do, no meds, no nothing that's going to help them. All you can do is try to help them get to the level of balance. And that's hard a lot of the time. Then you have people who, in the houses that if you sat and talked to them for 5 minutes, you're like, oh, really? That's cool. People with traumatic brain injuries, the same type of thing. They very easily present as quote unquote normal until you sit down and you're like, oh, you have a problem. You have issues. That's something. I was diagnosed with ADD before there was an H. Am I autistic? I don't know. Never took that test. Of course, the overlap is real, sir.
The overlap is real. Yeah, definitely.
The overlap, whatever statistics they have in the overlap, it's more than that. It's so much more than that, because a lot of the characteristics blend into each other so much. And if you put, I typically put ADHD on the autism spectrum. And if anybody read my book, Be an Anomaly, that wasn't a plug. But if you read the book, or that's how I kind of feel. But I feel like there's a lot of overlap with a lot of things. So neurodivergent, that's why I try to typically use the word neurodivergent unless somebody already has a diagnosis, because neurodivergent is neurodivergent. You have issues. I love it. Spectrums.
I was just watching Wreck-It Ralph. The rainbow. Look into the light.
So some boring numbers that M likes because she's a numbers person. Studies indicate that people with SAD, especially winter SAD, have reduced levels of the brain chemical serotonin, which regulates mood, which makes sense. But I would suggest that it gets exacerbated during the weather. And I would say that there's probably the co-occurrence of depression in general. Research suggests that sunlight affects levels of molecules that help maintain normal serotonin levels. Shorter daylight hours may prevent these molecules from functioning properly, contributing to decreased serotonin levels in the winter. And again, this is the National Institute of Mental Health. There's a few sites. The National Institute of Mental Health I like. The Mayo Clinic is really good. If you're gonna Google, try to Google something that has some kind of research behind it. Other studies suggest that both forms of SAD relate to altered levels of melatonin, a hormone important for maintaining a normal sleep-wake pattern. Yes, I didn't get the vitamin D yet. People with winter patterns that produce too much melatonin, which can increase sleeplessness and lead to oversleeping. People with summer patterns that may have reduced melatonin levels consistent with long, hot days, worsening sleep quality and leading to depression symptoms. So I would bet everybody that said they get angry when they get hot have more have reduced melatonin levels. And the longer days and the hot and the weather probably leads to their dysfunctioning and their body regulation, homeostasis. And that's a struggle because a lot of times, one study I was reading said that people with ADHD can't always regulate their body or recognize when they're too hot or too cold. And you'll see a lot of that with our guys because they'll go out, t-shirt, shorts, and you're like, "You fucking cold?" "No, bro, I'm good." "All right." Sure.
And then in the summertime, they're in sweatpants, t-shirts, and sweatshirts, like my son. And he's like, "No, I'm good. He'll say, he's like, "No, I'm cold." I'm like, "You're gonna die of heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
Take it off."
Yeah, Armani never wants to take his hoodie off. He wants to wear a hoodie every single day. We're like, it's too hot.
Yeah.
You're going to pass out. So I just think that, and it's real.
Yeah.
Negative. Also, how you think about the summer and the winter and its associated limitations and stresses are also common among people with SAD. So I think that as you get older with certain diagnoses, you become more aware and you get more educated. Whether it's anecdotal knowledge, experiential knowledge from doctors, and then you start to adjust for those things. However, it's unclear whether these thoughts are a cause of effects or effects of the mood disorder, but they can be useful focuses of treatment. So, I know shorts in the winter, like, dude, the temperature is minus. I don't know how he does it. Because Mr. Bainbridge, he's an animal. He's a superhero. A lot of times, our guys with autism, with ADHD, people that are on the extreme, like a beautiful mind painted the picture great, where somebody who's so extreme where they push their brain to the limits, well, what's going to happen? You push your brain to the limits, you're bound to have other things that come along with it, whatever that may be.
That's why I don't push my brain to the limit.
You do. Stop it. You push your body to the limit too. That's why you had knee surgery, because you were a bad girl and didn't listen.
I listened to my body.
I know. One of the things that we saw in Oppenheimer was that Oppenheimer, we know he pushed the button and blew up everything. How did it affect him? You tell me there was no depression, no anxiety. And I didn't see the movie. I'm not going to see the movie, but I know the general premise of it. Look at Barbie. When Barbie went into the real world and came back, all these things affect you and how you interact with the world. I believe you want to talk about treatments. You were really geeked about the light therapy.
I was geeked about the light therapy, but we also didn't talk about how that it's mostly that SAD is diagnosed with the youth. Yeah, with women and also the youth. I forget what the age, what the start of the age limit was, but we were discussing that one, we haven't heard about. SAD is like a recent thing that's coming out in the sense of part of the DSM-5 since the change and things like that. But we were also talking about how now kids have all this access to technology and they're able to see a lot of different things going on around the world. I mean, their anxiety is up, their depression is up because they think that they need to live these social media lives, or they want to live like these people who are doing the social media. And also the fact, when we were younger, I remember when I was in high school, the only way I learned about tragedies in other high schools was it was in the Newsday, which was a newspaper. It's still a newspaper, but, and in high school, that's when they made you read the newspaper. That's not true. They made me read the newspaper in 7th grade, I think. 7th, 8th grade.
I think that one of the travesties, but it's a double-edged sword with technology and information. Imagine when I was young, if I went when I ninth grade, my girlfriend, was it a girlfriend? I don't even remember. Girls, if I want to talk to a girl, I had to call a house,
Hmm.
talk to mom or dad on the phone,
Yeah.
right? That you, we can pick up a phone, Snapchat, FaceTime, phone call, text. You can talk to somebody on the other side of the world. I have a client who's Russian and she's in Russia right now, so I was checking in with her and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm in Russia. It's 5 a.m. right now." I didn't know because it was 9. Yeah, and I was just like, "Oh, how you doing?" She was like, "Great. It's 5 a.m. I'll talk to you soon." I was like, "Oh, all right."
I'm
Didn't tell me that
sleeping.
after the no, she wasn't. It was after the half an hour conversation we had.
Oh
But it's
wow.
but she's 24.
Mm.
So the way the brain works is different.
Oh yeah.
Even like you're terrible with texting. No offense, love you to death. But
I am. I admit it. I
yeah.
totally admit it.
But if we sat and had it, we could sit and have conversations for hours. We
Hmm.
won't get any work done because M is a natural distraction. I am a hard worker. And I go in and I just buckle down. She naturally just distracts me because
And
that's
I'm
what she
just
likes to
like
do.
beep bop boop bop
She's an
boop
agent of
boop
chaos.
boop. Nice.
Um, thank you. So
It
they did say
depends
that.
on which setting we're in.
Yes, they did say that women are more likely to be diagnosed with SAD. I would say it sounds. I think I've probably dealt more with. I feel like women typically, from the clients I've seen, are depressed and anxious together usually
Hmm.
a lot. Where I can see with the guys, I think the guys tend to be more anxious. Like they'll say, "I have a lot of anxiety," where I feel like women tend to have describe it as depressed. And I think that so I'm looking at this other article and it's saying that um, the most common types of depression that only women get, obviously premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, which is dysphoric disorder, when people have fun times around their period, perinatal depression and perimenopausal depression. Also, after you have a baby, there's a lot of things that are very specific.
But those are also hormonal.
Yep. Don't yell at me, yell at the article.
No, no, I'm not yelling at you. I'm absolutely not yelling at you. So I can see where seasonal affective disorder is the type that, again, the symptoms to diagnose are things that unfortunately put a lot of pressure on women in society, especially
Mm-hmm.
now with
Mm-hmm.
the way. You know what? I'm gonna take that back. I would say that back in the day, in
Mm-hmm.
the 80s and the 90s, 80s was when you started to have the crave of low fat, low calorie, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 90s is when you had the infamous Calvin Klein anorexic models, the heroin chic. So all those people in the 80s and the 90s, whether they were adults or they were growing up in that era, have a poor self-esteem issue in general. And then on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, you're dealing with postpartum depression, which destroys your body.
Mm-hmm.
After having a baby, you have to deal with the chemicals in your body. You have to deal with the fact that you're, depending on whether you had the baby naturally or C-section, whatever goes with that. I personally I had two C-sections, so I don't know how natural births went. Some people will say that I didn't naturally give birth. I didn't give birth, but right, it was. And then
A little bit.
premenstrual, you have the premenstrual,
Mm-hmm.
which again surrounds hormones, and you feel like shit, and you also want carbs.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm just
it makes sense, is
yeah.
what I'm saying. Like when you
Mm-hmm.
start to look at it, you're like, oh, okay, I see where this is coming. But they will quickly diagnose it as either premenstrual or postpartum before they would do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Of
Because
course.
postpartum, it could be it could be because you had your baby in the winters and you're stuck with
Hmm.
a baby and your husband, and that's it. If you're living with
But
each
also
other.
think about it, and we're gonna go back to that stuck with the baby because I wanna talk about that in the pandemic.
Oh my
Um,
God.
but think about it. You can say, and I have couples where the husband feels detached from the baby during pregnancy
Mm,
because, or the man, but
hmm
they just happen to be married. So because the wife is going through all of this stuff. The wife is still carrying the baby. She's got to change and can't sleep and all that stuff. Now you have guys. You could be, and I was there. You could be the best partner in the world, but your experience during pregnancy is not going to be like the female experience. And you already and the females. I'm saying females generally. I'm not getting into semantics. The females who are
I won't
carrying
get
the
mad at you.
baby. No, I know you won't. The females who are carrying the babies, what else are they supposed to do? Like they have the lion's share of the responsibility. They're carrying the
Hmm
baby, and of course they're going to grow a connection to something that's growing inside them. And then it's hard. And I know one of the things I do see struggling for husbands, wives, husbands, dads, baby fathers, whatever they may be, is now I have to catch up to that connection, and I feel slighted because I didn't have the chance to carry the baby. I didn't have and this is what I've been told. I don't think I really had this too much. My son, maybe a little bit more. He was closer to his mom. He's close to his mom now because he's a jerk and he doesn't like me, but that's okay. Um, but also, Armani's closer to Patty, and that's fine because I think that if you're going to take everything as a personal slight against you as a dad, then you're going to feel like everything's a slight. If you don't pick and choose when you grow your relationships with the baby, then that kind of falls in your lap.
See,
What else comes
because
postpartum?
we started talking about postpartum. Since I
You
had the C, it was me, of course, because I had a baby. I carried the baby.
had the baby.
I had the baby.
I'm with you, Kevin. I'm team Kevin.
Um,
Kevin did all the work.
Kevin wasn't the one. Kevin, but because I had the C-section, Kevin was the one that had to jump up and get the baby and bring it over because I breastfed. So, he had to bring the baby to me so I could breastfeed because if you're old enough to remember the movie The Christmas Story,
Mm-hmm.
when the brother falls on the floor and he's like, I can't get up, and he's rocking. That was me for the first couple of days when I went back home because it's different when you have a hospital bed. But that's where Kevin was able to kind of build his relationship. And again, because of the C-section, he actually was able to he held the kids before I got to because they had to sew me up. So he actually bonded them before I could. So
Mm-hmm.
I should be mad because he got to touch them first. But, it is what it is.
That was such an end moment. Um,
That was.
but I do think that one thing that I do think can lead to, and apparently male postpartum depression. I don't know if that's what they call it. I know it's male. Husbands have postpartum depression too, and that's a little bit of what we were talking
That's
about.
interesting. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it's new. It's something new I've been hearing about. Where one of my clients literally went through it because he was like, "I'm just the baby doesn't like me. He fucking hates me." I was like, "Probably not true." And the baby's only 3 weeks old. The baby doesn't
Oh my God.
probably. The baby's still neutral. All right?
Yeah. The baby doesn't pick yet.
No, they pick at
No.
6 weeks. But yes, I do think that one of the things that leads to probably that is the one part of the process that's probably equally traumatic and equally like freeing is when the hospital goes, "All right, baby's yours. Have fun. Fly,
Yeah.
birdie." Oh,
Yeah.
that shit got real. And they don't
And then
keep
you
parents.
you're looking at each other like,
Yeah, and they don't keep
what
parents
are
in
we?
the hospital as long as they used to.
Mm.
Ayan and Devin's mom had a C-section, and she was in, I want to say 3-4 days.
Yeah.
Now it's like All right.
I think
Bye.
C sections are still
Yeah, three
at least
quarters.
3 days, but natural birth you could be
Day and a
out
half.
like the next day or a day. And yeah, natural births are definitely they're kicking them out sooner.
They're rolling
But
them
for
out the window. Bye.
yeah for
Man, thank you for coming.
Ethan, I did 3 days, and he was a NICU baby. So then I slept. I think it was 1 or 2 more days in the NICU with him until he was ready to come home.
Mm,
Hmm.
facts.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll talk about. I want to just talk about the pandemic real quick, and then we'll land our plane and let you guys
The
get out of here
treatment.
in a few minutes. Yes.
We talk about
Um, so stuck in. So you said that a lot of times wives are stuck at home with the baby and the dad or other kids, and I think that's what destroyed the world, broke the world during the pandemic. That people were stuck to deal with their lives.
treatment.
You know how fucking depressing that is for some people. They
Thinking
got
that
me.
thinking you led a pretty good life, and then you realized how much you were a support or weren't a support to your partner.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, definitely. Like
Oh, oh.
every once in a while, I'll check in with Kevin and be like, "Are we good? Like, are we supporting each other?" And he'll be
Uh-huh.
like, "Everything's fine." And I'm like, I'm just making sure. I'm just making sure."
And you know how many so a lot of couples don't do that, and they need to, because what you saw was there's no place for you to run and hide. There's
Mm-mm.
no I'm gonna go down to the bar and drink a couple of beers. There's no going to
I'm gonna work later. Up,
yeah
I gotta pull
no
extra hours.
yeah.
So I'm gonna stay at work. Nope, there was none of that.
There's no
Unless
physical contact. There's no
unless
unless
you
you're
were, one of our first line people
responders. Yeah,
responders. Thank
but
you.
come on, we were there. I mean, I worked all through the pandemic. Chris Hall, you can read mine, sir. I disagree. You, on a scale of 1 to 10, you are an
uh,
11, Mr. Hall.
I wish. Ugh. There are some clients that I worked with that I wish I could get into their brain just to
Oh,
see what their thought process was.
oh.
Ugh, would
There's
have loved it.
so I find that with couples, that would be good, because I do think that people have expectations, because I'm a dude and most counselors and therapists are female. They expect me to align with their husbands. And I feel like they
Mm.
go automatically on the defense. Well, you just agree with him. You guys are just, oh, I'm
Two
not
peas in a
anything.
pod.
Yeah, I'm not anything. I'm listening to what you're telling me. I'm not doing anything. But that was the aside. That was the aside about that. So let's wrap it up. Talking about the different types of therapy. I know you want to talk about light therapy. So there's light therapy, and Emma will explain that in a second. And vitamin D treatments, like John was saying, vitamin D treatments are prevalent. Antidepressant medication and talk therapy. Gang, gang, gang. Go ahead, Em.
So light therapy uses certain UV rays, and you're gonna sit for whatever given time that you're. Lately, what I saw is a psychiatrist
Mm-hmm.
prescribing this, so they
Mm-hmm.
have like a whole breakdown of like how many UV rays you should be using, um, what type of light it should be. And what I thought was really interesting is that you can actually go on Amazon and just type up blue light uh,
Mm-hmm.
lamps,
Machines. Oh
and
yeah.
all of them are there, like all the different kinds. And like there's some that are. I'm not going to give the ones that psychiatrists prescribe and stuff like that, because I'm not a psychiatrist and therefore I'm not going to do that. But there are some that you can just utilize a lamp or by your desk, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just supposed to help with like those serotonin levels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I haven't seen it. I have someone in my caseload that will be possibly starting to use it. So I look forward to like taking data on it and seeing how
Mm.
we do. Love taking data. But again, they said in the studies that I saw, a pairing of blue light therapy with, you know, for me
Psychotherapy.
it said second generation antidepressants, but just an antidepressant was better for a person. But they also said knowing when you start to see that first, I'm drawing a blank. Precursors. Those
Mm-hmm.
precursors to when you start to see that depression start to deepen, that's where you're supposed to do, your lifestyle changes in the sense of like physical exercise and therapy, mood trackers. They have
Mm.
apps and they have the sheets, they have
Mm-hmm.
journals now. They have online programs, which, is really good for you to see whether or not you have SAD. Because if you track it, because I can say, oh yeah, I always get that. But is it really quite accurate unless you take the data? No.
Mm. And most people don't. So most people are usually slackers about things that require consistency. Like a lot of times, one of the big things we both talk about in our respective professions is that I need you to do. You have tools. I'm giving you tools. We're coming
Mm-hmm.
up with other tools together. You have to use them consistently. I've tried that before. That doesn't work. Well, did you do it consistently? Well, I tried it a couple times. Okay. I had one kid. I said, "Oh, have you tried journaling?" Yeah, I tried once. How long? Well, I tried for 15 seconds and then I gave up and I got frustrated. Okay. Yes. That's not what that's not what it is.
Yep.
Um so going into the to break down the light therapy. Light therapy has been a mainstay for treating people winter pattern SAD. It aims to expose people with SAD to a bright light to make up for the diminished natural sunlights in darker months. The person sits in front of a very bright light, usually at 10,000 lux every day, for about 30 to 45 minutes, usually first thing in the morning from fall to spring. The light box, which is about 20 times brighter than ordinary indoor light, filters out the potentially damaging UV light, making this safe treatment for most. Um,
Right. So you won't need sunglasses or protective
yes,
eyewear.
yes.
And if
Um,
it's a blue, I believe if it's the blue hue, it doesn't affect your eyesight either.
and also, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot with teens and younger adolescents, older adolescents, teens, is LED lights, and it's all full circle. The bright lights, the harsh lights, the bright white and yellow lights. A lot of times, kids want dim lights. They want the red lights or the blinking lights. If you type in LED lights or stimulant lights in Amazon, you'll get 4 billion returns,
Oh
and
my
that's
god.
because the whole idea of one of the things that the field in general is moving more towards is holistic treatment. It's not just I'm going to talk about this or I'm just going to put meds in my body until I explode. Now it's I'm going to take meds. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to run. This is one of the things that M does to dangerous levels of disgustingness. Um, oof, oof. But we're
Ooh.
going to do yoga. I'm going to do Pilates. I'm going to center myself. They have also what's a newer trend is nutritional psychiatrists that work with both nutrition and medication management. Yeah, and they look at the way foods
Wow.
affect the bodies and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of it is really like we've developing more of an Eastern kind of mindset to dealing with things and how we
That's
treat stuff.
good.
Obviously, CBT, psychotherapy, talking to people is a good way. I think talking in general, I tell people they should have 3 levels of support. You got to have a friend that you can talk to that's like your yes, queen, yes, bitch person that just
Your
do what
hype
you
person.
want. Yes, your professional, therapist, life coach, whoever, psychiatrist, psychologist, somebody that's gonna give you the real shit. And then you need somebody who's I don't need to say like a family or parent, but somebody like that that's loving and supporting unconditionally. That's your safety net. So when stuff happens,
Hmm.
the three of them can work together and catch you. And a lot of people don't use that. And then I also encourage people to use whatever creative outlets they have, because a lot of times, ask anybody who's going through any kind of depression if they're using their creative outlets, and they're probably not.
Nope.
They're probably not. And most of us have something that we can do creative. Crocheting, knitting. This resurgence of crocheting is a little scary because everybody's like 90-year-old moms. No offense, I'm just joking. Crocheting is great. Um, so when researchers directly compared SAD light therapy, both treatments were equally effective in improving SAD symptoms. They were greater with light therapy than CBT in some instances, and a little bit faster. And also antidepressants. And what I would say is, if you look close enough, John talked about vitamin D as well, you probably would start to see some stimulants. If ADHD is one of the comorbid things, and you'll probably start to see a lot of stimulant medication too. And that's good for helping your brain focus. I think that's probably it from what I saw in terms of the research. There's a lot. We're just scratching the surface. It was cool to get to know about, seasonal affective disorder. It was cool to talk about all the different things. And, as we come back every month, you'll see that things kind of overlap. And, they still have to be dealt with. And final thoughts, summations, closing statements.
I think that those that are diagnosed, I want to meet someone who is diagnosed. I mean, I know we just met someone, but like physically observe someone with SAD, just to get a mindset of what that appears, and not just one person, a couple of people. So I have it as like a little tool of mine that I can do, but it's definitely something that is definitely underdiagnosed. Going through the paperwork and then having this discussion with you, I can see where it's underdiagnosed because it overlaps with so many things.
Yes, I concur. I thank you, everybody, thank you for joining me. It's
Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it. You're welcome back next month. We will be talking about somatic psychology. You met Lisa. Did you meet Lisa before?
I don't think so.
She's a running coach. I don't know why, but she's another one. She's a running coach. She works with women predominantly because she doesn't like men. She does, but I like to say she doesn't like men. She's a running coach. We're going to talk about somatic psychology and how your physical movement affects your mental movement. I think that's the 20...
Oh, that's cool.
Hold on. I got to look when it is. People, give me a second.
I've been seeing a lot more somatic workouts to release emotions and stuff like that on on like the on the apps, on the social media, the TikToks.
And that's actually something that social media and TikTok, I like the Instagram and TikToks about ADHD and stuff like that, because it's short form, and I like the chunks, and you can give it to somebody who has it and they'll watch it because it's 2 minutes, and it just be like, oh, hey, look at this, and they'll get a picture, because these are people that are used to describing stuff in a minute and a half, and having it be effective. I'm also a big fan of the YouTubes with that, and sending YouTube videos. So what we have planned for February 11th at 8, somatic psychology. Then in March, we don't have the date yet. We're going to be talking about suicidality and self-harm with Mark.
February 11th is a Super Bowl.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Okay. Only because I know because the 12th is Ethan's birthday, and it either falls on his birthday or the day before or the day after.
Okay. Thank you. March is going to be suicidality and self-harm. Mark used to work at the suicide prevention hotline. You should come on with him. He's amazing. Episode 4 is going to be trauma with Colleen. She's coming back. So we're going to dig into a lot of these things. Like I said, this was just the first initial episode. Figure out how we're going to do it. But this was fun. And I thank you for your time. Thank
You're
everybody
welcome.
for joining. And if you have any questions, you can always hit me up in the Discord. You can message me, email me. You can send me a sky pigeon. You can send me a carrier pigeon as well. I don't discriminate. If you send me a penguin, I will come to you personally and respond because I love penguins. So, thank you. Da, 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 da. So, M, I'm going to take you out. I thank you.
Bye, everyone.
M, you stayed out. See you in a minute. Thank you, everybody. Joker out.